Welcome to the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast, the space where education meets resilience. I'm Dr. Joey Weisler, and in each episode, we dive deep into the personal stories of educators, students, leaders, and frontline advocates who are navigating the complexities within modern education. Whether you're just starting your teaching journey or are a seasoned professional looking for inspiration, we'll explore how to foster meaningful change, prevent burnout, and build trauma-informed communities within our schools. Now, let's take a seat at the front of the classroom as we get started. Welcome to the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast, where today's guest is someone whose story, like many in education, begins not in the classroom, but from the trenches of reality. Jheri South is a certified master coach, a speaker, and a mother of 7 neurodivergent children. After her son's near-complete suicide attempt, she became the ADHD coach he needed to survive, channeling her lived experience into a calling. Diagnosed with ADHD herself at 40, Jheri understands rejection sensitivity, impulsivity, masking, and the quiet shame that can follow a misunderstood mind. Through Headspace Hub, she now leads workshops, programs, and coaching that bring compassion and strategy to both parents and educators. Whether you're a new teacher trying to reach your students or a human trying to forgive yourself for what you did not know, this conversation is for you. Jheri, welcome to the show.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
It's so wonderful to connect, and thank you again for finding us. And with your work, I wanted to start diving into a little bit about the ADHD sector. So you described becoming the ADHD coach that your son needed to survive. And I wanted to know if you can take us back to that moment where you felt the sense of transformation in your path as both a parent and a professional, and a little bit of your background and introduction for our listeners.
Sure. There's a lot there, so I'm going to try to condense it. I was a single mother of 6 children for a long time, but at the time I was a single mother and my kids were just starting to struggle. So 5 of my children I had in 7.5 years. And I have to say, when they were young, they were pretty easy. They weren't emptying out cupboards and writing on the wall. I remember people saying to me, "You have 6 kids?" And I really said this. I said, "Well, like it's hard." Like I really thought that because it wasn't hard. My kids were easy. And then they started getting into their preteen and teen years, and it's like, you know what, hit the fan. And so I was really struggling with my son. I was not aware that ADHD was in our family at that time. I suspected my oldest daughter, who's 29, had ADHD. It was a long time ago. I didn't believe in medication at the time, but we didn't really have any diagnoses in our family. I just wasn't aware that was going on with most of my kids. And my son was really struggling, and I took him everywhere. I did everything. It wasn't working. He didn't like me at all. And at the time, I was already a coach. I had a lot of success in business and reinvention, and I was a single mother for a long time. And so I was helping other women, and I loved it. I never thought I would be doing anything different than that. And around that time, the women I was working with, they were begging me to do a program for teens. And I thought, no way, no way. You know, my teenage son, my oldest son, he's an adult now and he's thriving and doing great. But at the time, I think he was around 14 years old. He was struggling, but I'm getting him help. He ended up in a behavioral health facility. And I really had gotten to the point where I thought, I'm going to lose him. Help is not helping. And I didn't know where else to go. I'd gone to all of the best referrals I'd heard of. And there were some great counselors and therapists out there. I now have pretty strong feelings about getting help for someone who's neurodivergent by someone else who's neurodivergent and overcome their debilitating symptoms. But at that time, I didn't have the information I have now. And so I finally agreed to do a teen program. I did a pilot program. I think there was 10 or 15 kids in that class. This is not a parenting podcast today. I bribed him, right? I was not above bribery to go to this class. And it was the first thing that helped him. I would hear him behind closed doors talking to other kids that he met at this behavioral health facility and teaching them the things that he learned from me, that he didn't want to learn anything from me at the time. And I was actually pretty shocked. I knew that these tools were transformational. And I knew that the way we were integrating all the different things that we knew into coaching was helpful, but I hadn't even considered that at 14, 15 years old, it could be transformational the way it was for adults. And so I immediately shifted my niche. And then I just committed myself to learning everything I could about neurodivergence. We were being diagnosed in our family, my sister, myself, and it turned out that 6 of my 7 children have ADHD. 5 of those children are on the autism spectrum. everything started to make so much sense. Plus, when you have ADHD, a 60% likelihood of a comorbid condition. So we have debilitating OCD in our family. There was just so much. It was some mornings, many times, I just felt like I was being hit in the face by a truck or something, because there was so much going on. When their younger years, things had been so easy. And so, not to change the subject at all, but a lot of times parents will come to me and say, oh, a doctor suspects this or they suspect that, but they said to just wait until it becomes a problem. I do not agree with that advice at all, because my experience and the experience of many of my clients is that it will all of a sudden just hit you when hormones start raging. And this child that didn't display any kind of, I don't know, executive function deficits or debilitating symptoms. It's been going on for so long because we can only see what's going on the outside, but there are things brewing on the inside. And by then, by the time behaviors really start to manifest, there's usually already a fragile self-esteem. There's a lot of comparing. There's just a lot going on. And I dedicated myself. I reached out to experts like Dr. William Dodson. I brought a camera crew. I sat in his living room for 4 hours, and a lot of other experts too. I dedicated myself to learning everything I could about neurodivergence. There's no one that I wouldn't call to get information. And after years now of working with teenagers and young adults and adults too, but I really focused for a long time on teenagers. My mission has been to be the person that I was looking for when I needed help and almost lost my son. And unfortunately, I have had 2 children now who have struggled to that degree with suicidal ideation. It has definitely been a long journey, but has helped me be the person that other families are looking for when they are struggling with their kids. I volunteer my time, and I also will, of course, I get paid to go into schools, but I don't have as much time as I used to. That's why I enjoy doing podcasts. Is one of my favorite things to do was to go into schools and work with teachers and administrators and talking to them about ADHD and neurodivergence. And I was never in a room of administrators and teachers where they were even aware of half of the things that we were talking about. So it just takes a lot of time to do that. I have to set aside almost an entire day to go to the schools. And so I'm not doing it as much as I used to. And the other thing is you have to really work hard to get into schools. It's not like they're seeking you out for this information. You have to reach out to them and convince them that they need it, which that in itself is unfortunate in my opinion. So just trying to do as much work as I can in educating the educators about what else they could be doing to help neurodivergent children.
Thank you so much for all that you shared with that. And it's interesting that you say that this is not a parenting podcast. In a way, it is, because all of us as educators act in that local parentis role all the time. And they say statistically that our students spend a third of their day with us, a third of their day at home or doing extracurriculars outside of the classroom. Doesn't have to be with their families, but they're away from the actual classroom. And then if all goes well, which is probably not the case, a third of their day or 8 hours sleeping. I certainly didn't achieve a full 8 hours when I was in the classroom as either the student or the teacher. This podcast is also dedicated to all of those educators who ever walked out of their classroom at any point, any time of the day, and just thought, I wonder if that student's going to be okay before I see them again. And I speak to all the educators like myself who have had many sleepless nights worrying about children who are not our own. I have no biological children, but I always say, oh, every year I have a family of 150. It's our job as educators to do all that we can to make sure that those kids are happy, healthy, and safe under our care and navigation. So in thinking about that, so many teachers meet neurodivergent students without the training to recognize what we call rejection sensitivity dysphoria, RSD. And Jheri, you spoke about that in your work quite a bit. So I wanted to see if we can begin by having you define that for us and just talk to us about what are some of the first things that new educators and those seeking further development can understand about ADHD, RSD, and things about neurodiversity that we're not always taught to do in pre-service programs until we actually get to the job.
Well, yes, I love talking about RSD because here's what I wish every teacher knew about ADHD. And most weren't taught that ADHD is not just about attention or just distractibility, it's about emotional regulation. That is just as much a debilitating, if you want to call it a symptom, as the inability to focus or the hyperactivity. Kids with ADHD, adults do, but I'm focusing on kids today, they often feel things more intensely and they will recover more slowly. So their nervous system is always working in fast forward. Their self-esteem is going to take a hit probably like 12 times before lunch. But one of the most misunderstood pieces is rejection sensitivity dysphoria, or we call it RSD. And RSD is the extreme sensitivity and sometimes external reaction to the perception that they are being rejected. So I say perception because, of course, sometimes there's going to be rejection going on at school, but the majority of the time it really is perceived. And it can be triggered by teasing, it can be triggered by constructive criticism, even at times when it's delivered kindly, kind of fluffy, like I like to say, by their own perceived failure or failure to meet their own expectations or someone else's, disapproval. And for most people that I've talked to, and this was true for me, I did not know what RSD was. I didn't know I had ADHD in my 20s. I had debilitating RSD. And it felt, I would describe it as being clawed from the inside out. It can feel like an internal wound because the pain is so intense. It can trigger instant shutdown, outbursts, complete withdrawal from the situation. And so when this happens, we call it an episode. And what's important to highlight here is an RSD episode. Our goal is to try not to trigger an episode. Obviously, we can't control somebody else's emotions, but we can be aware of what just general triggers are and try to avoid those at all costs, because once an episode has begun, you cannot get that child out of an episode on your own. It is not the time, many times, usually because we don't understand what's going on, we're trying to get that child to talk, we're trying to reason with them, or even get them to apologize. This is not a good time. When they're in the middle of an episode, they need to be able to remove themselves and calm their own nervous system down. Usually, the more we try to calm them down or de-escalate the situation in a way that we see fit, it will cause the episode to be bigger. And the other thing is, the more that's going on for a child. So for example, if they've experienced trauma in their life outside of ADHD, or like for me, I know in my 20s, I had some abandonment issues. My parents were divorced and some different things happened. So when I had an RSD episode, it could have nothing to do with any of that. It might be something a girlfriend said to me. The episodes would be bigger and last longer. So really, the healthier that child is, the better they're doing mentally, probably the easier they can get through these episodes. If they're really in a phase of struggling, you're going to see episodes happening more often. And so de-escalation is not about getting to the bottom of what happened or trying to reason with that child at the time. It's about helping them calm their nervous system down. And I have a really great story if you'd like me to share it.
Yeah.
There was a boy that I had been working with for a while because he struggled with some different things, ODD, ADHD, and his RSD was pretty extreme and he was very impulsive. So this young man had been kicked out of an elementary school already. He was doing a summer program, and his history was that he really never had any friends. He was bringing chips and money to the playground, trying to bribe people to be his friend. So he really struggled internally. Anyone who wanted to be his friend, he would immediately just cling to that person. So he's doing a summer program, and this is now at a new school, and the teacher doesn't know him. So usually when he starts a new school, I get involved. We're briefing the teacher and the administration on what's going on, but it's a summer program, so we didn't have time to do that. So he's in this class and the teacher really knows nothing about him. So she's managing the class, I think, as any teacher would. She's trying to keep control of the classroom, and she notices that in the back of the room, he has taken a pencil off of her desk and he looks like he's going to break it. And she tells him, "Hey, put my pencil back. Don't break my pencil. Put that back." What she didn't know was his history and also that he has RSD. And this kid next to him, this boy next to him, is daring him to do it. He's calling him a chicken, and he's triggered by that. It's like Back to the Future. It's like chicken. And so he's telling him, "Oh, you're a chicken. You're not going to break the pencil." Okay. And so for that reason alone, he breaks the pencil. Well, what the teacher did in that moment was she called him out in front of the class. "I told you not to do that. What did you do? Okay, that's it. I gave you enough warning." And that triggered his RSD to a complete meltdown. Unfortunately, he was cussing at the teacher and he was yelling. So anyways, he goes to the office. He gets kicked out of the summer program. His dad is extremely upset. He tells him he's grounding him from the summer from video games. It's the beginning of the summer. He ends up in my office that day and he's crying. I mean, I think at the time he's in fourth grade. And from his perspective, he said, "It was a pencil. It was a pencil. What was the big deal?" And what he said was, If she would have just pulled me aside and talked to me, I would have apologized. But she purposely humiliated me in front of the entire class. She targeted me, is what he kept saying. Now, I'm sure the teacher didn't see it that way, but she had no experience with ADHD or RSD. She doesn't know. And a simple fix like that. So she ended up having him for the rest of the following school year. And she did not have problems like that with him anymore. To that school's credit, I talked to the principal and explained this to him. He brought me in to talk to all the teachers and administrators. And just that, the understanding RSD and how episodes are triggered, they just didn't call him out in public anymore. And that kept, we're trying to prevent these episodes, because when these episodes come on, I mean, he's in here crying. He feels so much shame for the way he behaves. And that's very common with an RSD episode. Sometimes the clients I work with, they can't even remember what they say in the middle of an episode because they just see red. Many of them can, but they do not have control over themselves. Someone with ADHD or neurodivergent, they're already 3 years behind in executive function deficits or skills. So somebody who is 10 years old is really at a 7-year-old level with executive functioning. So you've got to take that into consideration. And then when RSD comes on, they don't have control over their impulses if they really struggle with impulse control. So he's just crying. He feels terrible. He's humiliated. Just the teacher making those small adjustments of understanding RSD gave him a completely different school and learning experience for the rest of the year, because she took the time to understand this child.
Thank you so much for what a powerful anecdote. What are some ways that we can continue to include all different types of learners and learning styles as a way that nobody gets shut out of their ability to learn?
There's so many things, right? Because even just thinking of ADHD versus autism and triggers and what their needs are, even though I feel like both are technically on a spectrum because it looks so different, I think that first of all, learning about these things. I know here in Arizona, and I think it's this way in a lot of the states across the US, there is no required training at all for any of the
Correct.
administrators or the teachers in neurodivergence, which is not a good thing for the schools. There have been times I've ended up in meetings where they're trying to expel a child and the teacher has all the documentation, and then she finds out that she didn't do any of the things that were required of her and they didn't offer additional testing. And so there really is a liability for teachers today who don't have the training. That teacher ended up getting fired. It wasn't even the school's decision. It went all the way up to the top because she came in, she was told, you have this challenging class, don't let them take advantage of you. So she just came in and decided to strong arm them. I don't blame her. She just had such a lack of knowledge when it came to neurodivergence. You can't do that with a kid with ODD. Oh man, he dug in his heels. It turned into a huge battle. So I think the first step would just be become more aware of just like general information about autism and ADHD, because it's interesting. I specialize in ADHD. I probably have more kids on the spectrum right now that I'm coaching than not, because the ADHD comorbidity is so high. So a lot of teachers can see a child kind of struggling and they think, okay, I'm just going to push them and get them over this hump. Even though their 504 might say that they have anxiety, don't call them out. And they'll call them up into the front of the classroom to get them out of their shell. It's like, we can't be the ones that are, we have to follow these plans. And so understanding, first of all, what the signs are, what are some different things that kids are struggling with today? There's just an extreme amount of anxiety that kids have today. But I think also, whether it's OCD or autism or ODD or ADHD, I don't know any child that benefits from being isolated from the group, being publicly shamed, being sent to the back of the classroom. This same boy that I told a story about, when he was in third grade, he was just very hyper and they all had laptops. And so he had damaged his, he did. But for the rest of the year, they wouldn't give him a laptop. He had a paper every time everyone else had to get out their laptop, which was every day. His RSD was triggered every single day. We want to understand, instead of trying to control a child's behavior, you're never going to win with that. We want to ask ourselves, okay, what does this child need to feel safe? Behavior is communication. These kids, at least ADHD kids, they come home feeling a large amount of shame that they're not good enough, that they receive 20,000 additional corrective messages by age 10 compared to the average or neurotypical child. Fragile self-esteem, they're just walking around, masking, trying to fit in. And I commend teachers for the hard work that they do. It's very difficult, especially when you get into junior high and high school. I get it. Some of the clients I work with, I think, oh, to be their teacher, they're coming in every day just causing problems. But they can't control their impulses. We need to understand that because it seems like they can control it sometimes. We expect them to control it all the time. If you don't understand ADHD, this is another thing I see. You might have a child who, let's say they have ADHD and they struggle in math and they're failing. And then all of a sudden they do great on a math test. They get an 80%. And everybody, the teachers, the parents say, see, you just weren't trying hard enough. And that's so damaging for the child. ADHDers don't understand why sometimes they can get their brain into hyperfocus and sometimes they can't. And so for whatever reason, the ADHD brain, when something's urgent, when they're worried they're going to fail, like it's final grade, or this is going to make a huge impact in some way, they can force their brain to focus on something that they have not been able to focus on for the last 2 weeks. They don't know how to turn their abilities on naturally. Most adults don't. So when we as adults don't understand these disorders, that's what they are, right? Medically speaking, if we don't understand them, and we are just deciding because we don't like their behavior or because it seems like they're being lazy or they did good yesterday, but they're not doing good today, that they do have control over this. I really do think that can be, when we talk about trauma, big T, little t, trauma isn't just big things like violence, and it can also be the little things at school, being isolated, feeling rejected, being misunderstood. Every ADHDer feels misunderstood, whether they're a child or an adult. That can have over time the same effect on the nervous system. So if we don't understand it, go understand it, go read. There's a lot of information out there so that we can help these children. If someone's being disruptive, instead of isolating them, put a little note in the envelope and let them be your errand person for a few minutes. ADHDers actually learn better when they're walking around, they're touching things, they're using their body, they're in groups, they're in partners, they're able to talk, and we're asking them to sit still and not fidget. So it's hard for them and they're bored and they're checking out. So give them more breaks. Let them be the leader. I've never met an ADHDer that doesn't just rise to the occasion as soon as they're given a leadership responsibility. They're in charge of something. They're watching the time. They're going to be the line leader. We need them to keep track or sit at the teacher's desk or take notes. Be in charge of the whistle. Be creative. When we're creative, we can find solutions to help these children thrive. And it can be the difference between school being the place where they're experiencing trauma and school being the place that they're thriving.
I've actually had students come to me at the very end of the term, and they said to me, 4 months of me knowing them, they would be like my top of the top performers. And they would be like, hey, your class helped me because I'm a neurodivergent learner. And the reason why they would say that is because I value flexibility and creativity. What are some ways that we can allow the hyper-focused brain to maximally function in a standards-based classroom?
Well, I think the word you just used is very appropriate, being flexible, especially when I'm talking to parents. I'm usually working with parents and I go to IEP and 504 meetings to make sure all the accommodations are there. And what are accommodations for? It's just to help this child succeed that does not learn well in a traditional learning environment. And by the way, school, I'm not a huge fan of the way we do school. We haven't changed it for how many years? I mean, these kids are bored out of their mind. Unfortunately, that's just the truth. I'm meeting with teenagers and young adults all day, every day. And that's the first thing I hear. I'm so bored in school. And so we have these kids who are writing papers that they don't care anything about. They're learning about things that they believe they'll never have to use again, whether they will or not, is yet to be seen. One thing that I see schools get really caught up in is this is the way we do things. And we have to treat everyone the same. And especially for neurodivergent kids, some of the punishments, if you will, are just totally the wrong way to go about things. But it's like, this is how we do it. Or a teacher will have an assignment. It's like, this is what we're writing on. ADHDers, it's not like they should just be able to go out and pick all of their assignments and choose what they're learning about all the time, but give them a choice. Too many choices causes them to shut down. They can't make a decision, but give them two choices or have kind of a theme and let them come to you and say, hey, I think this falls under the umbrella of what we're trying to accomplish here. Can I write about this person? So with the ADHD brain, what we know about the neurotypical brain is that if something is important or there's going to be a reward at the end, someone who's neurotypical can get their brain engaged and just get it done. Those two things are utterly useless for the ADHD brain. The ADHD brain will only work if there's something that's novelty, something that interests them, something that's a challenge or competition, something that's urgent, and something that they're passionate about. If one of those five things is not present, they will sit there in ADHD paralysis. So the difference between them writing an awesome paper and failing that assignment or even being able to get started is just writing about something that they're interested in. I know we can't accomplish that 100% of the time, but if we can be flexible, if we can, we're not just giving homework and assignments just to give work, right? We're looking for competency. So adjusting assignments, recognizing what that child needs. ADHDers work better in partners. The body doubling is a thing. They work better in groups. They work better if they can stand up and they can touch things. The other thing about ADHDers is they really need a visual. If you can show this is what an A+ a project looked like last year, now they can do it because the ADHDers start at the end and work their way backwards to the beginning. It's just the way they learn is so different than the neurotypical brain. So sometimes even these kids are being labeled as not very smart, right? And that's actually not true. They're incredibly creative. They just learn differently. So we're, as teachers, I think we're challenged with how do we help them get their brain engaged? What is it they need? And so they know they're teachers. They know if it's a teacher they can approach. Half of the problem with the kids I'm talking to, young adults and teenagers, is they don't feel that they can approach their teacher or even their professor. That is no way, I would never do that. So we want to be approachable. We want to be flexible. We're there to help them learn. And if the traditional learning system is not working for them, then we want to get creative about what is it that they need so that they can shine, so they can show off what they really can do. ADHDers love visualization. They love storytelling. They love anything that's going to provide any kind of entertainment. That provides a huge task in front of the teacher or the educator to get these kids engaged. But it's not just ADHDers anymore. We're competing with video games now and all kinds of technology. The days of just sitting there in a lecture, in my opinion, for anyone who has a brain like mine, are gone. It doesn't matter how much like maybe I just need that credit and I want to do a good job. It doesn't matter how much I want to succeed. That's going to be nearly impossible for me to just sit in a long lecture about something that I don't care about at all. So find a way to get them to care.
Like you said, culture has now been competing against us for quite some time. And one thing that I've learned in my studies is that it's becoming less about just as important, but it's less of now. Yes, teachers still need to build relationships with students, but what I found more important is that students build partnerships with each other. I think once the students work together as a collective community, that's what lets the environment thrive. I get the students to know who's around them, and students like, this is a college class. Why do I need to know the 27 bodies that are here to learn? Yeah, you absolutely do. Because if you can validate in the conversational environment what that person sees and they're beyond just a face to you, they're a story sitting next to you, then that actually allows the whole entire climate to transform in a way that really maximizes everyone with their outcomes in that room. And as a teacher, you're building relationships by having those students get to learn about each other.
I am so impressed listening to this because you just don't hear this very often, even at just the lower level. I think that what you'll probably find, and what I have found when I'm doing different workshops and things like that, is that in the beginning, they might object.
Definitely resistance sometimes.
Yes, exactly. They're just sitting there. This is what they're used to doing. They're not going to have to be involved if they don't want to be. But very rarely, if you're good at doing this, and it sounds like you are, and getting them to engage with each other, getting them to connect on some level, they'll walk away glad that it happened, because social connection and interaction is always better than isolation. And even for the ones that are uncomfortable, especially the ones that have social anxiety, that happens a lot with neurodivergence, especially for those that are on the spectrum, they do not want that. But then because the teacher asked them to do it, it feels more like an assignment. They actually make a friend that they might be, for the last 6 months, were dying to make. There, in my opinion, very rarely will anything negative come from this situation that you are outlining here. I think it is mostly positive. So I think the advice, and this is really your idea, not mine, but the advice from this, from me, would be, even if it seems as though the students are resistant or they have a bad attitude about it, I can almost guarantee that even if you never know about it, there's going to be a lot of positive outcomes that come from this style of learning, more than just that they were paying attention. They're going to gain a lot more than that. Again, we only see what's going on the outside. We don't understand what's going on the inside. That's especially true for neurodivergence. And so we don't ever want to assume anything. That these kids are dying for connection, for new relationships in their lives. And for so many reasons that we don't have to dive into, but we all know they're struggling with that. We're struggling with communicating, we're struggling with interaction, and some of them don't know how to do it at all.
I'm thinking about a question that you kind of mentioned earlier with this. I want to bring it back to that. You asked the question when it comes to being in classrooms, what does this child need to feel safe? And I think about that from a physical standpoint after Stoneman Douglas, but also an emotional standpoint after seeing my friend lose his life to suicide. And if ADHD behaviors mirror trauma and vice versa, can you help us unpack how schools might be amplifying that cycle and what we can do to acknowledge and reduce it?
Well, I do think that there is a huge overlap between ADHD and trauma, and it's really, in my opinion, one of the most misunderstood areas in education. ADHD and trauma share symptoms like impulsivity, emotional dysregulation, zoning out, restlessness. So both can cause emotional outbursts, shutdowns, or forgetfulness, even like difficulty following directions. So the behaviors look the same, but the reasons behind them are usually very different. ADHD is a neurodevelopmental issue and trauma is situational, but both affect the nervous system. And schools, many times at no fault of their own, they don't understand the why. And so when schools only look at the behavior without asking what's underneath, they really do risk amplifying that trauma loop. And I think I mentioned earlier, a lot of times we think of trauma as abuse or neglect or violence, but really it's that all the other little things that happen at school, the isolation, the public shaming, the being called out, that have a very powerful effect on the nervous system as well. I think that recognizing that when it comes to the school system and the way that we are looking at neurodivergence, the way that we are reacting to these kids, I think about like just stereotypical ADHD, or a lot of times it's with boys, they're just hyper and they're causing problems and they're impulsive. And the way that we are reacting to them. If I was a teacher, I could see myself getting frustrated or tired of their behavior, but recognizing that the way we respond to them will make all the difference in their lives. And I reference Dr. William Dodson quite a bit because I have so much respect for him and the work that he does. I feel that he's not well known enough. So if you haven't heard of him, I would strongly recommend looking him up because he just came out with his book and he's fantastic. I consider him to be one of the top ADHD doctors in the United States. But he talked about that specialists look back at ADHD cases from years ago, adults that are much older adults now, who had really survived their ADHD without really any treatment because they were lacking so much years ago. And they interviewed those and found that those that were thriving, that were able to be successful in life and overcome their executive function deficits or any self-confidence issues, they all had one thing in common. And that was that they had a cheerleader in their life. They had someone who told them, hey, whatever is going on with you, it is not your fault. You are doing the best that you can. And if you are still struggling, then it's not for your lack of trying. We must have missed something. It's not your fault. And we will figure this out together. We haven't given you the help or the support that you need fully. And so I'm in this with you. We will figure out together how to get you what you need. And so I think feeling safe, especially at school, where there's so much comparing going on. We talk about fight, flight, freeze, and usually we use the word fawn, which I do think that kids with ADHD, they fawn, they mask, they become people pleasers. They're comparing themselves to everyone. They're used to being left out. I think it was something like a really high number, like 60 or 70% of kids by age 10 who have ADHD haven't been invited to a single birthday party. They're in people's faces and they're loud and they're interrupting and they can be labeled as obnoxious. And so these kids are struggling to fit in and to be accepted. But I also like to, instead of the word fawn, use the word fib. We also find the ADHDers don't tell the truth a lot of the time. But it's not usually because they are trying to express any kind of defiance. It's, for one, they're trying self-preservation. It's like they don't want to have to admit one more time that they disappointed somebody. They're not prepared for the punishment that's coming. They don't know how the other person's going to react. And also, sometimes they just need more time to process what happened. They're impulsive. They don't think things through. They're not even sure what they're supposed to say or how much responsibility to take. So we see these things happening and then immediately labeled as intentionally causing problems, not being willing to behave or participate, not being willing to do their work. And so many of these things are at no fault of their own. So I'm not someone who goes around using ADHD as a crutch. Definitely not. My whole coaching platform revolves around taking responsibility and overcoming anything that's holding you back. But as educators and adults working with those with ADHD, we want to have awareness to what they have control of and what they don't, and what's going to cause triggers and what helps them to feel safe. They feel safe when they're not constantly worried about the reaction of the adult who has charge over them, that they're not going to be yelled at for their behavior. They're not going to, I don't even like the word disappointed. I don't use that with my children or any kids that I work with, because disappointment is about me. Someone failed to meet my own expectations. And I don't want to teach my children that the reason they are achieving whatever their goals are in front of them is because I will be happy or not happy. I like to figure out, what do they need? What is this behavior trying to tell me? So we're constantly trying to provide an environment where we don't want the child to believe that we think that something's wrong with them, that there's nothing wrong with them. There is a wiring issue that they have not learned how to control. And we are there, in my opinion, to help them learn to control it. And nobody, an adult or child, can get out of that place when they're in shame. We want to be curious. We don't want adults or children. I do not believe in shame. I believe in being curious about what happened. Why did I make that decision? What didn't I know then that I know now? And then thank the past for what it taught us. I don't believe in putting kids in shame for anything that happened, especially at school. Everything can be a teaching moment and an opportunity for growth.
After the Parkland tragedy, along with my friend's loss to suicide, I felt it became necessary to advocate for my students' both physical and emotional safety. And I'm speaking here in solidarity for teachers everywhere who have faced tragedies of their own and have thought, what could I have done? And I wanted to ask, what are some ways that we can reframe guilt into something either more helpful, more healing, or even more useful? And what would you also mention in addition to that, just some final takeaway points that our audience should walk away with today?
Well, first of all, I just want to put out there that guilt is incredibly common when someone finally gets clarity on ADHD or neurodivergence, especially in school. Parents will think, oh my goodness, I wish I would have known sooner. Teachers will think, oh no, did I make things worse because I didn't know? But we can't diagnose what we don't understand yet. We just can't do that. And so I think that our brains love hindsight. It's once we have a name for something, ADHD, trauma, executive function, or dysfunction, it's easy to look back and see all the red flags now. But clarity now does not mean that you failed then. It means you finally have language that you didn't have before. That's all. And as I was mentioning earlier, I am just not an advocate for shame. I think it doesn't matter if we did know or we didn't know, shame is still going to keep us stuck and prevent us from doing the work that really needs to be done. So being curious about our behaviors, about other people's behaviors, about our experiences. Unfortunately, it's true that it's through our mistakes, and I don't really like that word mistakes. I don't really use it very often, but the audience
Trials
will.
and errors.
Right. I mean, I kind of think there's decisions we make that propel us forward and decisions we make that we learn from. That's the way I define it. But the things that didn't go the way we wanted them to, that's when we usually take the time to study and research and reflect. And that's where we usually experience the most growth. So again, I like the idea of looking at what happened, being curious about it, and then dedicating ourselves to doing it differently in the future. You can start to write a new story. And I think that's incredibly powerful, just having the knowledge that you have moving forward. Shame is never going to help you. And when we're in shame, we become a victim. We do. And so we're not going to help ourselves or anybody else when we're a victim. It's really easy to put blame on ourselves for not knowing things that at the time we had no way of knowing. So I've learned to not do that. And what a waste of energy that is What I really like to do is look at where I was so that we can show up for the people that really need us and show up for ourselves as well. My work revolves around, I've had a lot of struggles with my own family, with my kids, especially a couple of my kids really struggled in school. And when I look back, I could name all of the individual stories, the basketball coach, the teacher, the thing that happened, the misunderstandings at school. But if I were to sum it up, it would be the people that they struggled with because they were neurodivergent. Many times they didn't have the language, especially if you're on the spectrum. You don't always even know how you're feeling. You don't know how to advocate for yourself or express yourself. The times that they were really stuck and really struggled the most at school was when they had teachers or administrators that were not flexible in their thinking. They had a way of doing things, and that's the way they were going to do it, and everyone's held to the same standard. There was no room for growth in that situation, and it was very damaging to my children when I can think about the injustices and the things that my clients have been through, like not graduating because they got a D- and a huge lecture from their teacher that's their fault and they should have studied harder. I mean, these kids, one of the reasons that ADHD is missed so often is because kids are really good at masking. ADHD now is the term. We don't use ADD anymore because you're either hyperactive or hyperarousal. And hyperarousal comes with a lot of overthinking, a lot of comparing. And these kids are struggling to succeed in the school system. And so when they're met with compassion, when we are working to understand them and want to help them, it can be the difference between a child going home and feeling motivated to make something of themselves and going home and thinking about ending their lives. And I know that's really dramatic, but I'm doing this every day, and that is the truth. This is where we're at with these kids. They feel so much pressure today between social media and the expectations of parents and schools. Every child I talk to, school is so overwhelming. There's so much that needs to be done. And then you put executive function deficits that come in junior high and high schools when these kids really start to flounder because they can't keep track of everything. They can't remember. We need more compassion and more understanding. Once we get to know these kids, that's all it takes. When we hear their story or we hear what happened to them yesterday or that they ate lunch alone, or even though they were so disruptive at school, they went home and they have no friends. When we get to know them, then we have compassion. Then we want to help. But the problem is most of these teachers don't get to know their kids very well. They're teaching. And so there is no compassion because there's no connection. If we see a child struggling, be the one that wants to investigate why and be their cheerleader. Every child needs that.
Like Rita Pearson says, every child needs a champion. Jheri, thank you so much for reminding us that healing isn't just about strategies. It goes beyond what we do in the classroom, and it goes to making sure that everyone has a chance to feel seen. Whether you're a parent, a teacher, or even a friend trying to understand someone with either ADHD or trauma, Jheri's insights today have offered us something rare, which is honesty and hope. You can explore her ADHD Simplified course and book a free discovery call at jherisouth.com, found in our show notes. And please, if someone you know is struggling in silence, let this episode be the way to start a new conversation. Like we said, we can't go back on what we didn't know, but we can move forward with awareness, grace, and connection. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining us on the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast. If today's episode inspired you or made you think differently, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment or review wherever you listen to podcasts, and stay connected with us on the @Classroom Narratives podcast over Instagram and Facebook. Remember, together we can transform our scars into stars in education, one conversation at a time.